Yeah, it's not in the words, and oftentimes people have come to my gatherings, and when a question is asked, some will say, well, he didn't really answer the question. And you might say that the most important thing is the extension of love. So in terms of questions, for example, the ego asked the very first question that was ever asked, and that question is, what am I? And all of the millions and billions and trillions of questions that came after that are variations of the first question. So questions actually have to, you might say that just like Jesus says there's a right mind and a wrong mind, there isn't in reality, but he's using the right mind and the wrong mind as a device in the Course to bring the mind back into union. It's the same with questions. You might say there's helpful questions that undo the ego, that help you question your underlying beliefs and assumptions. And then there's questions about the world. This one versus that one, or so on and so forth. There's a lot of comparative analytical questions. And basically, I would say that all comparative and analytical questions that are aimed at the world, that are aimed at anything that seems to be in the world, are distractions against awakening, distractions from awakening. Because they aren't really questions at all, they're just disguised as questions, but they're actually declarations. You could start off by saying, I am an ego, and what's the difference between the chakras and A Course in Miracles? It's a declaration, I am an ego, and can you tell me the difference between these two different systems, or these two different forms? And so, when you look at it that way, you start to realize, these questions about the form can become very, very distractive, in the sense that the mind is not really asking for an experience, or the mind believes that there is an actual answer about these differences, when there really isn't, and there can be no answer. But that's the way that the mind has been conditioned to learn in this world, through comparisons. When you're growing up, when you're taking all these topics and subjects in school, or in university, or whatever, it's almost like a cumulative learning. You have to learn basics, and then you learn a little bit more. You can't really learn, your trigonometry without your algebra. You can't learn your algebra unless you've got your multiplication and your division, addition, subtraction. You see, it's a lot of learning the world. It just builds on what was previously learned. And there's layers of complexity that go with that. So there was one experience I had, I think I was in Florida, where a man came in and he seemed to be very, very disoriented and distraught, and he tried to ask a question, and he was spinning with so many different topics in his question that it kind of was like a gyroscope, and at one point, when he came to a pause, the words came out of my mouth, and then during the break, people started coming up to me and they said, I didn't understand his question until you gave the answer. Which is kind of an interesting thing. I didn't understand his question until you gave the answer. We tend to think the question comes first and the answer comes second, but it was flipped around in that situation. And what they were really asking, they were saying, what is someone really asking for? And underneath all the questions, and sometimes the varied questions and the multi-angled questions, there is a call for love underneath, and there's a call for clarity. And that's what the Spirit will address, regardless of the form of the question. The Spirit will always address what is being called for, what is being asked for. And so, I would say this is the same with parables. It doesn't matter what the parables are, or what's said in the parables, or whatever. The mind is calling out for love, and is calling out for peace and understanding and clarity, and there is an undoing or a dissolving away of the questions that's part of that opening up to that experience. And so oftentimes the parables or whatever comes out is a way to start to help dissolve the question underneath. Because the ego is the questioning aspect of the mind, the spirit is not. The spirit doesn't have any questions. And so the part that's asking the questions has to give way, has to dissolve away to an experience.